this point, something has got to give over at Red Bull Racing. Either Max Verstappen goes or Christian Horner goes. Simple as that. Because a reality in which both are able to coexist with one another is looking less and less likely by the day. I understand that kind of discussion is not something that Red Bull fans would want me to be talking about, given that so many headlines at the moment are focused on contemplating the broader issues that have faced the team for the last couple of years or even longer. That even if you're not a fan of Red Bull Racing, you're just sick and tired of hearing all of the headlines. Well, I've got news for you, Red Bull Racing. Stop being so controversial that you get in the headlines. Sure, things started off as something relatively minimal, which ultimately didn't affect the fundamentals of going racing in F1, because the team secured their first double in nigh on a decade in 2022. But as time marched forward, more and more news began to come out to suggest that the dominant force that was the RB19 masked an ever-growing issue that would come to the fore once the competition found some means of pushing back. Note McLaren by the time the circus returned to Europe last year. In the midst of Red Bull trying to find some way of developing the car to a point where Max can feasibly defend his world title and get a fifth one to really set himself up alongside Hamilton, Schumacher, Fangio, what have you, more and more cracks starting to really show themselves in the entire operation. At any moment, it could come crashing down. This may have been the case for a good 2, maybe 3 years, but due to the fact the team had a dominant car, it wasn't such a big issue. But now the car is no longer dominant. In fact, it's barely able to hang on to being the 3rd or maybe 4th fastest car. So now, questions have to be asked. And as Christian Horner said in the very first episode of Netflix's Drive to Survive, "I'm Christian Horner and I'm the team principal of Aston Martin Red Bull Racing." Oh, don't get me started into that bit. "And effectively, the buck stops with me." Well, Christian, if you still stand by that rhetoric, then everything that's going on with Red Bull right now, it squarely rests at your feet, sir. Now, granted, lasting in that position for 20 years is no mean feat, but perhaps there is just cause for an even more in-depth management reshuffle to be had after such a shift was made last year in the wake of Jonathan Wheatley headed off to Audi so that he may realise his own widely known dream of becoming a team principal. Wait, Law, hang on, this can't be all the fault of Christian Horner, right? Surely the presence of Max Verstappen has got something to do with this. He's exacerbated so much internal pressure on that organisation to bend to his whims and wants and needs, so he's surely got stuff to answer for in this matter, right? Well, yes, that is a fairly valid point, which does go back to the thought that having these two men working in the same team is becoming less and less viable as a solution to remain competitive. But the team has indeed evolved into what it is today, with the Dutchman as its lead driver for nearly a decade at this point. And whilst its relative stability and continuity is a luxury within F1, something of which was afforded to Mercedes during their domination era from 2014 through 2020, Lewis Hamilton, Toto Wolff, nothing lasts forever. But even then, it just makes you look back at that period of F1 history and just realise, wow, Mercedes were really, really stable. Unlike Red Bull right now, we are now getting to the point where many pundits are lining up to say and accuse that you are bullying the likes of Liam Lawson or making panic moves or something like that. But nevertheless, it is perfectly valid for observers and experts to point the finger at the 4-time champion as to the min-max nature of the team. But now the team's no longer producing the returns that have been afforded them during this particular regulation cycle, despite the fact that Verstappen's overall impression of said regulations have not been favourable. That whilst it has brought him immense success in his induction to F1 Legends Club, the car's concept overall has honestly not been the most fun, he would say. So you can imagine that right now he is having even less fun. There are some voices who may argue that Verstappen's enormous influence and uncompromising approach have indirectly shaped Red Bull's current challenges, one which has resulted in the last 6 months alone see the fates of 3 of their own drivers be thrown about the place. Those being Perez, Ricciardo, and now Lawson. I mean, I don't think you need me to tell you about how vocal Max Verstappen has been in regards to the inefficiencies and inadequacies of the car he is trying to drag back up to the top, much like what Fernando Alonso did in 2012 at Ferrari. And the fact is, though, this straightforward talking is putting surely immense pressure on the technical team to try and find a solution. After nearly a year of this being made public, it's clear that Red Bull have not found the cure-all, and I think Max is getting sick and tired of it because you then hear reports that he's having to muck in on his own and no longer trusting the efforts of Pierre Wache and his team to be able to figure something out themselves. And that is clearly not optimal when he's mounting a title defense. However, many experts would suggest that all of the onus should not be on Verstappen's shoulders, that he isn't solely to blame. It's a complete rabbit warren of various factors that have seen Red Bull end up where they are today, that they are very much like a glass house. And it's now gotten to the point where people have picked up so many stones and are chucking it in Christian Horner's direction that cracks are beginning to form before the whole thing comes down. Because you get internal conflicts between figures like Christian Horner and Helmut Marko. Ah yes, Dr. Marko. I bet you were wondering when he would rock up into this particular discussion. And I have been wanting to say this for a long time, but have not really had the opportunity, despite the fact I've made so many videos about Red Bull as of late. My own personal belief, including many other pundits and experts, including a former F1 driver and one of the key figures in setting up Toro Rosso, Gerhard Berger, believes that his fellow Austrian may be a really detrimental factor into the integrity of the entire operation, which is incredibly bizarre considering that Helmut Marko is not an employee of Red Bull Racing. Berger suggests Helmut Marko's public comments may have been part of a broader pattern that, intentionally or not, undermined many prospective long-term hopefuls at Red Bull who might have stood a chance at challenging Max Verstappen's authority. Take Sergio Perez's standing with the team. When you look back to how things were between Checo and Max after 2021, those two looked like a perfect double act. Because even though Sergio Perez wasn't really figuring in terms of the championship hunt, he still played his part in remarkable fashion to secure the dream Max Verstappen and his father Jos had for so long, to win the Formula One World Championship. And we all remember the thing that Max said over the radio, Checo is a legend. He had done his part, the pair looked tight, and it might have resulted in a friendship and working relationship that would endure past the likes of Daniel Ricciardo, that finally Christian Horner had found a stable, working driver lineup that could last for many years until the Red Bull Junior team could mount some viable candidates, and then the future of the entire team and academy would be remaining secure. Brilliant. Not to mention, Checo had found a new lease of life as Max's sidekick, whilst also realising his own dream of competing for a front-running team after his premature explorative year with McLaren in 2013, which quite frankly was a complete and utter mismatch for the ever-so-clinical Ron Dennis. It was an impulsive move, but that partnership changed between Max and Checo after Monaco 2022. Perez's spin in qualifying secured him pole, denying Verstappen a final lap. Perez then went on to win the race, but the fallout was immediate. Even though Max has never really come out and talked in length about his feelings at the time of that incident, which denied him the opportunity to get back-to-back victories at Monte Carlo, which is quite the rarity. The last time that happened was Nico Rosberg, and he was able to do it thrice. This may still, though, imply that he viewed Perez's qualifying crash, where Checo's aggressive throttle application and subsequent spin cost him a chance to improve his grid position. Maybe this was more in his mind than just a simple mistake. Many interpret this as Verstappen holding a grudge, believing that Sergio's incident was intentional, or at least recklessly executed, thereby influencing his subsequent decision to stick to his own race strategy, rather than help Checo secure a good position in the championship at the end of the season, most notably seen in Brazil. And then there is the position of one Helmut Marko to consider here. As we all know, he has been present for the majority of Max Verstappen's single-seater career, one of the archetypes in securing that he was not going to become a disciple of Toto Wolff, and instead would rock up in Red Bull colours, partnering up with Toro Rosso, and then finding himself where he is today. That connection is incredibly deep. It goes back decades. In fact, you could easily say that the two of them are good friends. Now, I'm going to be putting up the spanner of speculation here, and I'm not saying that Max Verstappen told Helmut Marko to go about a smear campaign regarding his teammate after what happened in Monaco, but given the fact that Helmut Marko really does look out for his lad, who he deems as irreplaceable or impossible to emulate with any future star, then matters may have been taken into his own hands. Perhaps Marko's comments toward Checo throughout 2023, after Max was irritated once again by Checo after he claimed victory at Baku that year, it could be seen by some as exacerbating the instability around the Mexican driver as the RB19's development began to elude him. And as we now know, his warnings about the phenomena were not heeded when they were brought up, since Max was doing so well. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if Marko's comments may have subtly shaped team dynamics in Verstappen's favour, though there is no clear public proof of deliberate manipulation. But one thing is definitely certain throughout all of this, is that the situation at Red Bull, it's a completely tangled, complex web, isn't it? But nevertheless, like I said near the beginning of the video with that Drive to Survive quote, the buck effectively stops with the team principal, Christian Horner. Sure, Max has had his play to part throughout all of this, but ultimately Christian Horner has the authority to, if he felt it was becoming no longer tenable and it was actually detrimental to the overall health of the team, to just cut off the contract and kick Verstappen out. Not that he would exactly do that, because quite frankly, at this point, the team is hanging on dearly to Max to try and get any meaningful results. They made a rod for their own back, which admittedly, the Verstappens constructed that rod for them to use, but they are still using that rod for their own back, dang it. And whilst Horner's credentials precede him and the success he has brought to a team that was initially dismissed as a party team should be respected and acknowledged, Formula One, though, has evolved and the competition has closed in. The onus does swing back to the matter of the team principle and the actions that have been undertaken, and the lack of a long-term strategy in which would see to the smooth transition of senior personnel who would either choose to retire from the sport. We all know the gradual exit of Adrian Newey had been long underway, with its influence quietly scaled back since 2014. But this is something I have said in many videos up at this point, that I feel that the beginning of this particular high-level, top-tier brain drain began in 2023 when Rob Marshall went to McLaren seeking a brand new challenge before he would then ultimately retire. The true ramifications of this move would not be seen until 2024, since the RB19 had already been made. Marshall is the engineering equivalent of Newey, so therefore there would be no problems, no warning flags. It reminds me of what happened with Williams in 1997. Adrian Newey had parted ways with them after being undermined one time too many. He was on gardening leave, but he'd already developed the car for that year, the FW19. It went on to win the World Championship, and that was that. There seemed to be no warnings, but then the following year, 1998, Williams came crashing down, not figuring at all in that championship, where it was Ferrari versus McLaren. Which is exactly what I'm seeing at Red Bull. Red Bull, like Williams in that year, have a car which is not really figuring in both titles, despite Verstappen using all of his powers and then some to figure it all in either of them. And now Yuki Tsunoda has been confirmed as Verstappen's teammate, at least for now, pending yet another driver rotation, the team said. Now, whilst this move on paper looks like it's going to be a rather popular move, it still brings up many questions. It doesn't completely absolve Red Bull of any wrongdoing. And the biggest question of all is that if they truly believed Yuki Tsunoda would be the ideal candidate to partner up with Verstappen, then why wasn't he put in place before the season began? And if he struggles to try and adapt to the car, even though he has personally claimed that he can, what does this say about the entire Red Bull racing philosophy? Something has to go, or something has to change. If Tsunoda can do nothing with it, who can? And then there's the rumours that I've been hearing that Honda had to stump up even more money toward the senior team to try and get this deal across the line. That on top of the $10 million of sponsorship money they provide Tsunoda in general, that they might have had to drop in an extra $10 million before their own home race to try and get the deal done. That they could convince Christian Horner to just drop Liam Lawson after just 2 Grand Prix, unless Liam Lawson gets a promotion back to the team, which based on team history is never going to happen, that he will have been the shortest serving Red Bull racing driver in its entire history, even shorter than that whole bizarre Christian Clean beat Antonio Liuzzi thing. If this turns out to be true, then all the stuff that Christian Horner has said about believing Tsunoda's experience and that he deserves a chance at the senior team, no, it's complete then we are just in the same position that we were with Liam Lawson as to why on earth is he at the senior team with only 11 Grand Prix behind him. It'll mean, once again, this choice in driver was not based on merit, but something else. Ulterior motives. In this case, money. What were the other reasons, Christian, for you hesitating with Yuki? Is it perhaps you feared that he might fly off the handle like in the past? If so, that is an incredibly stubborn and really cantankerous justification, especially considering that in all other metrics, Tsunoda had done enough to really provide the justification to giving him a go. So in the midst of all of the media hoopla, the pictures of Yuki in Red Bull colours, it again begs the question, why didn't you go with this in the first place? Seriously! There is no way that Red Bull can come out of this smelling of roses. There is going to be some sense of negativity and some sense of just complete and utter incompetence. And the only person that's going to come out of this as a winner is Yuki Tsunoda, because even if he does struggle and he doesn't produce results that many people hope for, people will just blame the car. People will look kindly on Yuki. Quite frankly, the entire situation has descended into a matter of questionable decisions. More than just the matter of the Sergio Perez contract extension, or the locking in of Tsunoda and Lawson last year before meaningful discussions elsewhere could manifest themselves. What about Daniel Ricciardo? The man who many people perceive to be the most capable of being able to wrangle something out of the RB21, whose driving style is probably relatively close to the likes of Max Verstappen? Sure, Ricciardo has clearly lost some of the magic that he had at the peak of his powers when they were last teammates, but he would have had that certain something to be able to get something out of that car before they can then find a long-term solution. Just one more year back at that top team to completely realise the fairy tale return. Even then, with the issues of the RB21, it would have been papered over because, yeah, Max and Daniel were back together. Christian managed to make his dream come true. Suck it, Zach Brown. You were wrong in dropping him. We got our boy back. Haha. It doesn't matter what you say and all your barbs. We managed to bring the Australian back and he's popular. Woohoo! And in the meantime, Pierre Vacher's team are going, quick, we gotta fix the car. Well, then Daniel Ricciardo's just like, oh, it's great to be back, guys. Max, yeah, you're really fantastic. Yeah, mate, it's really good to have you back, man. It's just, it feels like old times. Yeah, no, good. They didn't do that. All the stuff that happened at the Belgian Grand Prix, when promises were made, they were then broken. Daniel was disillusioned. There was ultimately no room for him in the plan, and therefore he was jettisoned. Liam Lawson came in. His reputation was then thrown in tatters with his all honest, all guns blazing situation, regardless of who you were. The whole thing of, I'm not here to make friends, I'm here to win. No, you're there not to make enemies, Liam. Whoever told you to say that should be sacked. The entire situation completely fell apart. The quote-unquote driver rotation, according to journalist Thomas Mayer for Planet F1, might suggest that it could be not the end of this matter. Might this suggest that should Liam Lawson exceed expectations at Racing Bulls and get a steady run of points alongside Isaac Hadjar, we could see the drivers being swapped back again? Now, I could easily imagine that if Yuki Tsunoda holds his own there as well and manages to secure some decent results or maybe a couple of podiums, if they then decide to swap them right back round again, saying, oh, Liam's managed to re-find his mojo, we'll see how he is with the more redeveloped and more evenly balanced RB21, imagine how that will go down. Or maybe this driver rotation could be somebody from outside Formula One. Because as I said in my video from yesterday, even though Liam Lawson has been given a stay of execution at Racing Bulls because Franco Colapinto has been locked in over at Alpine, this is not the end of his particular battle. He's got to do the deed here, and Arvid Lindblad has got to completely flounder in F2 for Lawson to have a somewhat medium-term future. But given the fact that Marko and Horner really back Lindblad, he's already got the super license points, he's going to be getting that special dispensation because Antonelli did over a Mercedes, the odds are really stacked against Liam unless he can rise above the strategic issues of Racing Bulls and get some solid points. And get that P5 that Racing Bulls' France Tost when it was Toro Rosso had been clamouring for. Now, of course, if I was talking about any other team in this situation, you would deem this as absolutely absurd. But this being Red Bull, this is just par for the course at this point. What's the surprise? There is a lot of speculation and uncertainty as to the long-term future of this team, but quite frankly, at this point, somebody at the top needs to go. And considering that Helmut Marko is not employed by Red Bull Racing, it either has to be Max Verstappen or Christian Horner. The formula that worked since 2016 now looks outdated, and with new regulations looming, the cracks are starting to show. It's been long established by the Verstappen family that should the team be unable to produce the car that their man can win races in, mounting a meaningful bid for a championship, then their time with them would be cut short. And right now, Verstappen has made it clear that he is frustrated, not just with the RB21, but with the team's overall direction. The exodus of key personnel, the revolving driver lineup, the lack of a clear path forward, it mirrors what we saw with Hamilton at Mercedes over the course of 2023. A champion who was growing restless that his influence was not enough to be able to steer development of that particular car. Ultimately, he did manage to find his way into the engineering department and therefore make sure that things did get done, which did result in the W15, but it still wasn't enough to keep Hamilton around. The car had a more predictable platform, yes, but it was just too darn slow most of the time. The same could be had for Verstappen with the RB21 at present. Does leave, whether for a rival team, another series, or have a sabbatical, it might force Red Bull to recalibrate. Maybe without focusing their efforts on one sole driver and following the trend with the other front-running teams of building a car that both drivers can reasonably work with, this might be a means to try and refocus development around a brand new model for a brand new regulation cycle. That maybe Pierre Rachet's efforts might be better suited to a platform that he solely created instead of him trying to add on top of the model that Adrian Newey developed with the RBA team at the beginning of this cycle. And if Tsunoda is able to hold his ground this season, even after Honda parts company with them and then moves over to the work still at Aston Martin, Yuki might find himself in a good position to become the team leader of Red Bull Racing, should Max indeed decide to go and do something else. Or is it time for Christian Horner to step aside perhaps? As I said at the beginning, 20 years at the helm is impressive, elevating the team to the point where it stands alongside the greats of the sport like Ferrari, McLaren, and now Mercedes. His legacy is undeniable. However, the current Christian Horner has found himself into a position that is far less manageable or competent. After just about weathering the storm that was levied against him at the beginning of 2024 for, well, you know the reasons. I have to be careful with what I say because it's not quite done. There is meant to be something had at the beginning of 2026, so it's not all completely signed, sealed, and delivered for Christian. The fact remains is that he has said time and time again, even to the bods over at Netflix, that he is responsible for how the team goes racing. It's up to him to either fix it or stand aside and allow the team to reset itself. As what though? Horner's identity is inseparable from it. So what happens if he steps down? Is there even a succession plan? Or has the team become so shaped around him that it can't function without him? I mean, at this point, who knows what may happen? Maybe he might just decide to completely scorch the earth behind him as he leaves, that if he goes, the entire team goes with it. I mean, that would be an incredibly bombastic way to go about things. All I'll say is that none of this would have happened if Dietrich Mateschitz was still around. But quite frankly, what Red Bull needs to do in the here and now is change their fudging car. Make no more driver changes, keep things the way they are for the rest of the season, and just, I don't know, entrust the drivers when they provide feedback and do it in a timely manner? Because I reiterate, had Checo's warnings been heeded back at the Spanish Grand Prix of 2023, maybe Red Bull might have found themselves in a position where they might still be dominant to this day. Or if the likes of the other competition had caught up, they would still be the leading force, and Max would be able to mount a fairly comfortable championship defense. Right now, though, he's hanging in there for his dear life, and it's all just making him out to be one of the greatest legends of the sport, that he can just drag that tractor up to potentially a podium. That's huge considering that everyone else around them is so close. Which then leads me to just one more thing. Christian, just send Helmut Marko back to Austria. He's not the boss of you. He's meant to be in charge of the Red Bull Junior team. Make him focus on that alone and not be an influence on the drivers who have already made the grade into the senior ranks. Isaac, Yuki, Max, he's not your overlord anymore. You are bigger than him. Especially you, Max. You're your own man. You're a full-time world champion. Your word carries more weight than his. And quite frankly, at this point, if Red Bull wanted to have their own version of Niki Lauda, they failed. Horribly. Because there is no way that Niki Lauda would be acting this way. Ever. Because I can't imagine that Lauda would conduct himself in the way that his old friend did in Australia, which not only saw multiple drivers see the wrath of Marko, but Isaac Hadjar's career was placed in the public eye for matters that weren't related to racing. To find out more about why Helmut Marko was the more To find out why I think Helmut Marko was the embarrassing one and not Isaac Hadjar, watch this video next, straight after this one.